All right, everyone, so let's go over some of the answers for Spiral Review Part 1, which is the study guide for the test, which is going to be on Thursday. It goes over 5.5 to 5.7. 5.5 is solving radical equations, something like number 1. 5.6 is compositions, so something like number 2. And 5.7 is inverses, which is something like number 3, and also like something we'll see later on. So the first one, what is the first step in solving the radical equation? Given. Okay. So in order to solve radical equations, you need to isolate the radical. So ask yourself, what is on the left side here besides the radical? And the answer is 1. So that's why the first step is to add 1 to both sides. After that, then you would square both sides to get rid of the radical, but this is just asking for the first steps. All right, number 2. Number 2 is an inverse question. So there's 2 ways to write the notation. Composition of functions. So there's 2 ways to write the composition of functions. So there's this way where you see a bunch of parentheses, and then there's also something like number 4 where you see that open dot. So as a clarification, that open dot does not mean multiplication, so there's 2 different ways to write compositions. Compositions are where you take what's closest to x, so the g, and you plug that g of x in to the outer function f. So what I mean by that is, since this says f of g of x, we would take what g of x is, which is this x minus 3 over 2, and we'd substitute it in for x in the f equation. If it was in the other order, we would do the opposite. So this is what my problem looks like for number 2. So after I input g into f, notice how before I even distribute that 2, you have this whole thing multiplied by 2 and also divided by 2. So those 2's cancel out. But something really important to note is if you decide to distribute this out, just know that you're only distributing it to the numerator. Think about it. This 2 is just 2. It's not 2 over 2, because if it was 2 over 2, it would be 1. So if it helps, put this over 1 so that you can really see, oh, these 2's are going to cancel out. And then when you do that, you see that you have x minus 3 left, and then you add that 3 at the end. Those cancel out, leaving you with just x. So interestingly enough, even though this was a composition question, it turns out they are inverses. Because when you compose 2 functions and you get the answer of just being x, those functions are actually inverses of one another. Okay, so the answer to number 3, very connected to number 2, is that when you do that composition, you want that answer or that result to just be x. Number 4, this is just another notation, so just remember that f of g of x is the same as taking out that little circle and just adding an extra set of parentheses. So the order stays the same, and you're still doing g into f, g into f. It's just 2 different ways to write it. Number 5 goes based off of kind of what number 1 was. So let's try to isolate that radical first. So we're solving this radical equation. The first thing we want to do is subtract 7 from both sides. So when you subtract the 7 from both sides, this is the step we're at here. So in that step, in order to get rid of that square root, which is the next step, you square both sides. That squared cancels with the square root. And, sorry, my dog is chewing a bone, and I don't want him to attack my other dog. Ronnie, come here. Don't bother him. He's fine. He's just slower than you. Okay, so square both sides. That cancels out the radical symbol, and then you're left with x minus 5 by itself is equal to, dear goodness me, please do not mess this up. When you are squaring a binomial, remember that you're really writing it out as x minus 7 times x minus 7. You can bet your bottom dollar that there's going to be a question like that on the test. And it's something that annoys math teachers a lot because it's something that we always say, and it's something that students just never commit to memory. So when a binomial like that is squared, because they're separated by that subtraction sign, you absolutely cannot just distribute that square to both sides. That will not work. That will make people sad. And you don't want to make Mr. Lotta sad. Okay, so when you double distribute or FOIL, you end up with, after you combine your like terms, x squared minus 14x plus 49 on the right side, and that left side is still x minus 5. In order to solve this, you want to bring everything to the side that the x squared's on. The x squared is your boss here. So bring everything to the side with the x squared. So that means subtracting x from both sides. Remember, I'll combine my like terms. That gives me negative 15. Add 5 to both sides. 49 plus 5 is 54. And then we do our favorite thing in the world, which is factoring. So from this step, a is 1. So we find two numbers that multiply to that last number, 54, and add to the middle number of negative 15. So two numbers that multiply to 54 and add to negative, 15. Okay, so then once we found them, which was 6 and 9, you set each one equal to 0. So x minus 6 being 0, which would mean that x is 6. X minus 9 equals 0 means that x would be equal to 9. And then you have to check for extraneous solutions. So extraneous solutions are solutions that arise in these problems, but then when you actually plug them back into the original problem, it doesn't work. Because when you're squaring both sides here, you're actually eliminating, or not eliminating, you're creating new problems. So you have to check with radical equations. So here's my check, and you can see I plugged it into both original equations here. You could see that one does not work, and one does work. So the one that works is your answer, the one that doesn't is not your answer. So 6 is actually an extraneous solution, whereas 9 is the only solution. So the answer would be x is 9. All right, so that's page 1.